For fans of the Leader series, DVG Zero Leader, this man needs no introduction. But if you are one of our sports gamers who also loves war games, or you're just a fan of the company or the designer, Mr. Chuck Seegert here, thank you so much for sharing.
Good morning. Thank you.
This is tremendous. And you've got the Corsair Leader, Zero Leader, quite the companion set there.
Yep.
So if you would maybe just kind of, well, the reason I came across, just for a little background here, is, I've just gotten back into wargaming a bit, buying the games and not opening them. And I was asking about the German pilots of World War II, because you've got a lot of the great, B-17 Leader and
Right.
the games you see here. And I was wondering, what about Hartmann and Rahl and Galland and Marseille and Rudel? And turns out you're working on a little something in that regard.
That is correct. I'm calling it Jaeger Leader, which is an Air Leaders World War II series game, but it's coming at it from the German point of view. So it will have all German pilots and everything else. The exciting thing to me is something I wanted to do with Zero Leader, but we didn't. And that is separating the pilot from the airplane. And the reason I'm doing that is so that you can have a pilot with your name start in Poland and stay with the German Air Force as it goes on, flying different aircraft. He can fly an ME-109, an ME-110. He can go to an FW-190. He can do all of these changes, get to a jet late in the year, do all these different things. When I separate the pilot from the plane, that makes that all opportunity. It also gives me the opportunity now to introduce wounds. I introduced minor damage, but technically it was in the Corsair Leader in the carrier operations, but it wasn't very fleshed out. But I introduced minor damage in Zero Leader, and now that was where if you rolled the highest number for stress but not damage, you got minor damage. Well, now if you roll the highest number for damage but not destroyed, your pilot gets a wound. And depending upon the severity of the wound, your pilot may just shrug it off and go back at it, or he may miss a couple of missions, a couple of mission days or whatever. So that allowed me to introduce the medical staff. Now you can purchase extra doctors for your flight squadron, which would help work with stress, not to mention taking care of wounds. And of course, mechanics are still going to be in there. They're not as dramatic as they were in Zero Leader, where they didn't have the equipment or anything like that. The Germans were pretty well equipped, had plenty of spare parts, do that kind of stuff. So the mechanic is in there because I love that mechanic, but it's still in the game, but it's not as dramatic. But I'm also adding a fuel thing. So later in the war, you're going to have a limited fuel supply, which means you may come up with a mission that says you can send 7 aircraft. You don't have the fuel reserves to send 7 aircraft. So now you maybe only can send 4 aircraft or whatever. So those are a couple of really cool things that I'm adding to just make it interesting. A different game. It'll be just like Zero Leader, just like Corsair Leader. It'll have all of that core, but more stuff to it yet, and without getting overly complicated.
Excellent, excellent, man. So many great questions just on that answer alone. Maybe for folks who are not as haven't cracked the box yet, or haven't on the fence about Zero Leader or any of the Leader series, but why would you be? And there's also Spruance Leader now. Could you just in a nutshell tell us about what the general Leader concept is and what makes it so adaptable across equipment, eras?
The basic core of a Leader game by DVG is, a lot of the old war games. Now I've been playing war games since the very early 70s. Skipped a lot of school to play war games, but that's a completely different story. But the old traditional war games were, okay, you're side A, I'm side B, let's line up, let's go at it, okay? The Leader series doesn't do that. The Leader series says, okay, here is your campaign. In Zero Leader, let's say you're going to do the Midway campaign. Corsair Leader, you're doing the Midway campaign. Here are the aircraft that are available. You select how many of each type of aircraft you need and at what skill level do you want them so that you can perform your functions. And the funny thing is, the first time I really played an air leader game, I played Corsair Leader because I happen to be a pilot in Corsair Leader. So I chose the Midway campaign or the Wake Island campaign. And I'm thinking, well, this is pretty simple. I'm going to fly an F4F Wildcat. I'm just going to have to defeat Zeros and bombers, right? So I picked my squadron of good fighter aircraft, everything else, and my first target was a cruiser. My guys couldn't hit the sea with a bomb, much less a cruiser. So I lost the game in one thing. You need to think it further. You need to have aircraft that can handle all kinds of stuff and pilots that can handle all kinds of stuff. And there's the crux of the leader. It's not a just go smash them up kind of game. You've got to not only choose your stuff, but you have to take care of your stuff. The pilots start to get stressed. In Zero Leader, the planes can become damaged and you don't have the mechanics to fix them. There's all kinds of little nuances that don't add hours onto the game, but add decisions onto the game. Things you have to, okay, now do I fix this minor damage and leave those two guys go with maintenance neededs, or do I fix the maintenance neededs and leave this guy sit on the side with minor damage? That's your decision. Solo games are notorious for not having decisions. B-17, Queen of the Skies. There's no decisions. You just shake the dice and go. Well, you're a pilot of a B-17 in a squadron in World War II. You shouldn't have any decisions. But in Zero Leader, it's full of decisions. There's full of little nuanced decisions that you make that'll decide how your game goes.
Excellent. Yeah, I think you've talked a little bit about how you research these games. And, obviously we're awash in new research, but I wonder if you might compare, I mean, again, we've, been around a bit. So, these war games, you were, as you say, you're a veteran of Avalon Hill, the greats.
Yeah.
Do you feel there's any difference in the quality of data? I mean, athletes have stats, you have specs, I mean, pilots have stats. Do you feel there's any qualitative difference in research that was done closer to the era that you're replicating, simulating versus information that's available now, but might, be affected by some sort of recontextualization?
That's an amazing question. There is a lot more available. Like in sports games, there's stats that they never kept track of in the 70s, 80s, 90s that they're keeping track of now. Data-driven football. I don't know if you're familiar with that game. That it's a fabulous game, and he goes so deep into all these itty-bitty little details. It's crazy what you can do. Okay. My real problem actually with Zero Leader is trying to get information on the Japanese. Okay. Imagine, if you will, you decided you were going to do something on a AA baseball team. Try to find the information on a AA baseball team. Not so easy. Okay. I found all the information I could possibly want from the American side, British side, but very difficult to get information from the Japanese side. That was the most difficult problem. But I don't really believe that I ran into a lot of changes, a lot of things that I hadn't known, again, from playing games and honestly being a World War II airplane fanatic since way long ago. I'm not sure airplanes were flying then, but no, I mean, a long time ago. I've always been doing it. So this was just kind of a little love thing to do. And the information was there. It was easy to find, and somewhat.
One of the things I love about it apparently is there's a cup of sake in the Zero Leader game. And, it's that kind of color of the game I always advocate. How do you balance, again, the reality with kind of adding these less numeric, less quantitative functions of a game or of, an experience?
Kevin Burson and I worked really close. I mean, we became really good friends while we were working on this, but we worked really close on it. One of the things that we really worked on is the razor edge balance of reality, seriousness, detail, and playability. Okay. Going back in the 70s and all that kind of stuff, it seemed like Avalon Hill and all of them tried to make their games so realistic that they weren't playable. Okay. Nobody wanted to play them because it took you 7 hours just to read the book in front of you while you're trying to play. And we didn't want any of that, but we wanted it to be realistic. And one of the things that runs through fighter squadrons, especially, and I'm sure it runs through football teams, baseball teams, everybody, when the battle is done, you need to relieve some stress. You need to get rid of it, okay? So I came up with the sake idea, which is just simply a bunch of pilots got together in a tent and got smashed. And there went some of their stress. that was the whole idea of the sake. In the Zero Leader and Corsair Leader, there is a priority thing that you can purchase during the mission to eliminate some stress. And that's perfectly fine. But I made sake a little less expensive, but you had to purchase ahead of time. So in other words, when you went to the island, you had to bring you a couple cases of sake along with you. And it's just a fun little thing that can really help your squadron in a long campaign get rid of some stress and away you go. So in Jaeger Leader, surprisingly, it's going to be called beer. So it's shocking. But yeah,
I was gonna say it could be schnapps, especially.
it could be.
And if you ever do a flying circus leader, God, I hope that happens. Somebody wants to be Richtofen, that would be awesome. Sitting around the aerodrome.
Well, there's a guy working on Sopwith Leader, so that's in the works. Ian is working on it real hard, so that should be coming along pretty soon too.
That's interesting too. I mean, I remember playing Richtofen's War going back to Avalon Hill. And then you'd have Yakinto's Wings, for instance. You had a bunch of other World War One, the early wave of World War One air war games. And it felt like when they tried to translate them to a World War II concept, the results were very skewed. Maybe I was just too young and playing it wrong. But it feels like with this the leader concept, you can, again, as you explained, I mean, it's really just, it lets you function a whole different way as a designer. And does that kind of make your job easier? And do you share tips with the other designers within the context of the leader genre?
Yep. Yeah, I do. I've been working with Ian with his Sopwith and everything else. There's a couple of people, guy working on a Soviet side World War II, so he's going to be doing Russian airplanes. And I'm really coordinating with him because when it's all said and done, we're going to have rules so that you can play Jaeger Leader against him, so that you can be just like you can do Corsair Leader versus Zero Leader. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of cooperation and a lot of different things. The maneuver and robustness that I added to Zero Leader is now going to be standard throughout the air things, although you talk about it coming from World War I to World War II and the concept's not really working so well. Maneuverability, it's a difficult concept to get into the modern era games because a lot of times it's launch and forget, launch your rocket and away you go. Like there's no maneuvering in Phantom Leader and all that kind of stuff because there's not a lot of maneuvering, especially when you've got all aspect radar. You just head on, you can fire the missile, you can do whatever you want to do. So I know that there's a couple of modern Fulcrum Leader has been announced. I know there's an Eagle Leader for US modern in the works. Whether you can really make maneuverability and robustness work in that context, I think it works far better in World War II. So there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of conversation. My stuff that I've got in Zero Leader, the maintenance, the aggression, all that kind of stuff, that is not preparatory to Zero Leader. It's Dan Verson games. So they can put, like aggressive is making it, I think, into all the games from now on. The pilot aggression that I added, different kinds of stuff that are making it into all the games. And, that just makes me proud that they want to put that in. So we share, we communicate, we do a lot of that together.
Speaking of the different versions, the different theaters of war, I wonder to what extent, pilot or outfit style. I mean, the Germans had a way of training and flying, right? US a different method? I mean, does that factor in, and particularly as the war goes on, less experienced pilots rushed into battle, things of that nature?
Up to Zero Leader, that didn't, okay? Zero Leader actually is set up so early in the war, let's say Corsair Leader. Corsair Leader, your squadron is made up of this many of each skill level of pilots, okay? From the start to the end of the war. Well, in Zero Leader, early war, you've got a lot more veteran pilots, that kind of stuff, a lot less green pilots when you start. At the end of the war, you've got a lot less veteran pilots and a lot more green pilots, newbie pilots. We actually came up with an expansion for trainee and rookies to bring some guys who can barely keep the airplane in the air, but that's reality. That's what they were flying at the end of the war. So Zero Leader actually does that. All the other games up until then were pretty much, this is it from 40 to 45, you know, and the newer ones also, you know, it didn't matter if you were flying in 62 or 72, the pilot quality didn't change or any of that kind of stuff, which I always felt was not good, but it was the way it was done. So.
In terms of a couple, I guess it's a two-part question. I have a nasty habit of doing that, but you know, I noticed in Corsair Leader, it was very nice and very wise and very modern that they thanked the Solitaire War Games group for its efforts, its support, its feedback. I wonder how you use the feedback and how you ultimately, you know, can confirm your accuracy. I mean, again, you talk about balancing realism versus playability, but you know, completely different questions. I guess, how do you use user feedback and tester feedback, first of all?
Well, tester feedback is extremely important, okay? But you talk about like the Solitaire War Game group, Danverson Games has all kinds of groups, you know, specific to games, and there's also Danverson Game fan page. Just recently, yesterday, I posted a question on Danverson Games fan page. I said, listen, all of the leader games go newbie, green, average, skilled, you know what I'm saying? What if a German game went Oberst, you know, Oberlieutenant, Lieutenant, you know, that kind of stuff, going up with the actual things. And it was interesting to see the responses. Most of the people were not positive about it because obviously they know the newbie through legendary progression. But I take that kind of information and I go, all right, is it worth making that change? Because I think it's cool. And I think the storytelling of it, because now you can separate the pilot from the plane so the pilot can go on, he can be promoted and moving on. I think that's really cool. And I think that's a cool storytelling rather than him being a legendary pilot. He is, you know, an Oberst or whatever. So I thought that was really cool, but I got some very interesting feedback. So, you know, now I have to take that and decide, okay, is it worth it? Do I do this or do I do that? You know what I'm saying? As far as accuracy is concerned, I'm very happy, knock on wood. I'm very happy that I've made extremely few errors as far as the abilities of the aircraft and everything else, which is really, it's hard because nobody quantifies maneuverability. There, you know, you can't, it's 100% anecdotal and knowledge based, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, you got to look at an airplane and was it known for its maneuverability, or was it just an average aircraft, or was it known to be a flying brick? Okay, so that was a very difficult to assign number to all of these, you know, to quantify something that's not quantified and everything else. But nobody has said, oh, you know, you're crazy. You know, this aircraft doesn't maneuver like that. It does this. No, you know, so I've been very, very lucky in doing that. But again, that was people feedback. That was a lot of anecdotal information, that kind of thing.
Interesting, interesting. I don't know if you remember a book called Flying the Old Planes by Frank Tallman, but I wonder, you know, he flew some very early replicas of World War I planes. you know, of the era of replica or rebuilds that say Cole Palin was doing up at Old Rhinebeck, not far from me. I wonder if you have, or the other designers have, or if it would be helpful to visit some of the events like the World War II Museum at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Reading, or Classic Fighters over Omaka, or Warbirds over Wanaka, things like that, to actually see replicas of these planes in action. Would that factor into any of your decision making, do you think, or is it just not really relevant?
Well, the part of it that would factor in especially is that, you know, when you're in a museum, and we've got the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association, so I've got all kinds of aircraft available to me, especially when the EAA is flying here. So I not only can walk up to them or whatever, but I see them flying over, you know, my house and doing all this kind of stuff. So that is a very cool to actually see it in real life, but to speak to the people who are actually flying, not so much the rebuilds are definite, you know, the replacements, the fake ones, like, you know, the fake Cobra race cars and all that kind of stuff. They're different, but you get the people who are actually flying the Corsairs and actually flying Zeros. To talk to them that's huge. That's a really good piece of information to get, you know, and reading the books, you know, Sabu Sakai, his book, and all kinds of books that I've read, and, you know, in the past and during this, those were huge helps. So going to those types of things, my wife doesn't enjoy that, but I do. I love going and seeing. The EAA Museum has a whole wings area of all World War II aircraft and carrier operation. Doing that, I can get lost in that for a day. So I love doing that kind of stuff, and yeah, it definitely helps. It helps to look at that stuff.
Does that help fuel the desire, or what is kind of the real deep desire to kind of play these games? I mean, you mentioned B-17 Queen of the Skies. Obviously, Compass has kind of renewed the concept with America Bomber, Defending America. And while it is kind of the dreaded dice rolling exercise, I mean, it kind of puts you there to the degree that it's possible to, you know, simulate combat, obviously. But I just wonder, what is it about, you know, what is it that compels people to want to have these experiences? I mean, why, you know, why so many World War II games, for instance, I guess, is part of the question.
I think World War II is because it's so available, and it was kind of the mix of, there's too much technology nowadays, you know, it's shoot and forget. I mean, it's not, but it is. And World War One, there wasn't nearly enough technology, but World War II, you know, if you think about it, we started with biplanes, we ended with jets. So in those 5-6 years, there was a huge amount of progression, and it's definitely was pilot and aircraft skill. I enjoy it because I like to really think tactically and strategically. That just does it for me. Simple games, you know, a lot of the worker placements, what do we call them, Euros or that kind of stuff? No thanks. Data-driven football, absolutely love it. Okay, it's 3rd and 10 now. What do I do? You know, that kind of thing. I love that kind of. I've got to think in order to do, not just do. And so that's my motivation. Is I love war games for that reason, and I think an awful lot of other people do. I think they just love the idea of competition in a field that you're not really going to ever do. You know, I harken back to the old Spitfire SPI game. I played that. God, I played that so many times. But my friends just loved it because we would be flying aircraft that, you know, you never even saw or anything like that up against other people. So it'd be like a football game, but it was quick and it was deadly. So that's what motivated me. Something that's fun, that you've got to think about, and your decisions have complicated or consequences.
You know, it's, again, bringing up the older games and the evolution of games. Obviously, war games are moving away from those. You talked about the voluminous, to put it charitably, Avalon Hill charts and records. I mean, rules books, Third Reich, Squad Leader, and forget Advanced Squad Leader. Now, of course, folks are going to these very colorful, card-driven, card-based action games. Obviously, folks like us have gone through, and I imagine most of the people buying the games have kind of worked through that era, that pre-digital era with maybe a hint of video games. And we're used to those games with heavy charts. Have you felt generally that gamers have really embraced the card concept, or did some of them kind of push back or drag their feet initially, saying, where are my charts? Where are my big numbers, minuscule, gotta pull up the monocle and read the charts there? Or has the transition to card-based games been really welcome after all this time?
Well, I think it's definitely welcome, and that may be more, I don't know, it may be more societal than anything else, is everybody wants stuff that happens quicker. I represent Danvers and Games at gaming conventions throughout the Midwest, okay? And when I go to them, I see these games that are set up, and some people set up these very intricate Napoleonic Wars and everything else that look gorgeous. But you can tell 1 or 2 turns in, half the people that are standing there at the table are going, how do I politely exit? Because this is like way too much involved in 1 turn. Then I see these other guys that have a lot of aerial war games. They're playing Wings of Glory, Wings of War, and that kind of stuff, where people are involved and it's happening right now, right here. They flip a card, oh crap, or whatever. Those kind of games, the people get excited, they get into, and they get involved quicker. Okay. What I love about the Danvers games is you can choose your thing. You can do like the Pearl Harbor scenario. If you spend 45 minutes playing the Pearl Harbor campaign in Zero Leader, you've dilly-dallied for a lot of time because it's not a very long scenario. But you can also play Homeland Defense, where now you've got a couple hours of worth of play and everything else. So it kind of cuts right through that center. It's not super quick all the time, but enough stuff happens quick enough to keep your interest. So it's not like the old games, which were just drag-ons. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I was going to say, I was going to ask, is it a game to kind of jump in and kind of really try to bang out an objective? Or is it one where you kind of, you're really relaxing and coming to settle into almost, like watching Saving Private Ryan, a movie, and kind of partake in that movie? Would you say that video games and their aesthetic and their speed and their functionality and their Easter eggs have had any influence on the current aesthetic of wargaming, or even sports gaming, any gaming really?
Well, I think it certainly has improved the appeal, visual appeal. Okay, you can't get away with the counters that, think back to Avalon Hill. Look at what their counters look like. Okay, you can't get away with that nowadays. You need to have a good quality counter. You need to have good graphics. People expect that kind of stuff. And like Zero Leader Vassal is now available for sale on the Danvers website. So you can play Zero Leader on a computer. Okay, I've done it. Plays great. I like it. I'm still more of a tactile kind of guy. I like to do this, but it's available. But it has definitely had an influence. It's not only sped up the games because people are used to no setup, right? If you're playing a game on the computer, you click start and it's all set up, it's all ready to go. So they don't want to spend 4 hours finding what hex does this guy go into and all that kind of stuff. They don't want to do that anymore. And they want the action to come along. They want this kind of stuff to just keep happening. So video games have had a huge influence in present day wargaming, I think. But
to the point of digital evolution and the influence back and forth, and again, we came up at a time where it's board games, and then you're starting to see, a little, fledgling computer, an Atom or a Commodore or Texas Instruments, and maybe some of the early Coleco handhelds and whatnot. Now, of course, younger folks are growing up digital, digital, digital. And I just wonder, in your mind, if it's more fruitful in terms of marketing games, whatever genre. And obviously the pandemic's had, a role in getting everyone to kind of play more games. But I wonder if, we try to say younger people are the future of the gaming market. And we always say, oh, we got our kids into it. But really, are games of this type, premium print, I like to say print is premium. Are these games really becoming tailored more toward the midlife, folks who are kind of seasoned gamers, maybe the kids who are coming out of all the digital play and suddenly they have the patience and the desire to do something that is more nuanced, in depth, a little more tactile, as you say.
Yep. Yeah, I call it a little more rewarding to actually go out there and look at all the components and set them up. When you're choosing your squadron and zero leader, you've got all the pilots out and you're flipping them around and everything else. To me, that's all part of the game. That's all part of the setup. That's all part of it. And I think, yeah, as you get older, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they want to bada bing, bada boom, let's get this done. They're busy. I'm retired. I ain't busy. But they're busy. They want to move along, So, but as you get older, yeah, then you can start to enjoy and set up these experiences. And again, like go back to the game conventions, watching people walk past and look at these tables that are set up. You just, no matter what the game is, people will stop and they will look and they'll say, well, what is this game? You don't see that in computer things. People don't go and look at your computer screen. But they will, if you've got a game set up, they'll come over and they'll look at it and they'll go, ooh, and especially if you're playing with miniatures, that really, I play all my games with miniatures. So even Zero Leader, I'll set up and I'll have 1/300th miniatures up there. It just grabs, it's visually appealing, and that gets them into actually doing it by hand rather than doing the computer. So in answer to your question, yeah, I do believe the older people get, the more likely they're going to be playing a printed copy of a game rather than going online. Now that may change as this generation grows up because they're so used to the computer, but I still think the idea of, like with my grandkids, they love playing on the phone, but my oldest grandkid, when she was 12, I think 11 or 12, I brought out Dogfight, set that up for her, and I played, and she won. But she really got a kick out of physically moving things and doing that kind of stuff. Well, it's a really simple game like Dogfight. So there's hope. But yeah, I think it's as they get older, they'll be more and more interested in print.
Last question, sir, and I thank you so much for all your time and your
No,
insights.
I thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. What are some games on your wish list or games you'd love to see on Kickstarter? What would you absolutely just throw your wallet at?
Way too many. See, now before I retired, I was in the car business. Okay. And everybody's constantly asked me, what is your favorite car? And I would always answer, the last one I sold was my favorite car. When you're in the industry, they all, that all comes together. So the same with games, but there are a couple. One of my Grail games is Downtown. That is, Vietnam War type game. I really have looked at that game, but I'm not going to spend that kind of money. So that's definitely one of my Grail games. There are a few DVG games that are coming out. Warfighter is amazing. If we get the Russian version of Zero Leader coming out, that's going to be cool. So I look at all of these games and I think, yeah, those are really neat. But solitaire games are definitely where I live because hard to find people who want to play. We have gaming groups that get together and we play all kinds of games, Wings of Glory, Wings of War, all the simpler kind of games, but that's what we have to do when we get a group together. But the group only gets together so often. Everybody's got so much going on, it's hard to get people together. So solitaire games are where I'm at. I own Ambush and all these other games. The advantage to being an old fart, I have the opportunity to own all the games that I've ever wanted, you know, the old Avalon Hill games and doing all that kind of stuff. I've got quite the selection of games. So the newer games, there's some coming out that are kind of interesting, but I don't know of one that really makes me, you know, put my charge card online right now to go and do. It's just me.
You know what? Actually, I lied. Not last question. I did want to know, how did you come to join DVG?
That's kind of a fun story. Corsair Leader was coming out. Okay. And they came up with, I was talking with Kevin and Sarah, and they were coming up with a stretch goal. I immediately got into Corsair Leader because I thought that's me. World War II aircraft, bada bing, bada boom. Well, they came out with this thing where you could name your own pilot. That was one of the stretch goals. You could be a pilot in the game. So I got really involved in that and working with Kevin and doing all these kinds of things, and we became good friends. And then just online talking, that kind of stuff. And then my granddaughter, I've got a granddaughter who is extremely good in gymnastics. She had a national competition in California a few years ago. Turns out it's a 2-hour drive away, but I made the arrangements that they were all going to stay at the hotel one day. I was going to take the minivan we rented, and I'm going up to meet Kevin and Sarah. So I went up and I met Kevin, Sarah, and Dan. Fabulous people. Had a great time. Needed to repack my wife's suitcase on the way home because all my games weren't going to fit. So we had to move her clothes around and do all that kind of stuff. But so we became really good friends. I was out there for their wedding a little over a year ago, 2 years ago. So we just became really good friends. And when we were doing Zero Leader, it was hilarious because Kevin's wife, Sarah, and my wife, Angel, both of them, Kevin and I would say, okay, we're going to talk about this item and we're going to talk for 1 hour on the phone. Cool. 3 hours later, my wife comes downstairs doing this. and Sarah's doing the exact same thing to Kevin. And we never talked about what we were going to talk about for that hour. We talked about everything else and we never really got anything done. He's a great guy. We have Dan is an amazing person. So that's how I got into them. And then playing Corsair Leader, and a friend of mine designed a game off of B-17. It was called B-25, Prince of the Skies. And I designed a scenario for him, the Doolittle raid. I designed that for him. And then I thought, So I contacted Kevin and I said, how about if we do Corsair Leader from the Japanese side? Well, he got excited right away and away we went. But so they're really, really great people. And that's how I got tied up with them. I told them when I met them, I said, I'm going to be retiring soon. So maybe I could represent your stuff, go around the country or around, especially the Midwest, and represent your games and do all that kind of stuff. I love doing that. I love meeting all the gamers, talking about the games, showing the games. It's a great time. So yeah, we get along really, really well. I love DVG. I think they're great people with good products. So I've been very happy with them.
Chuck, thank you so much. I really appreciate
Thank you.
You and all your work.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.